Well, hello guys and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we will install the Visual Studio community. So make sure to go to this page or simply type Visual Studio community into Google and click on the first link that should take you to this page. And in here, as you can see, it says download Visual Studio Community 2017. So simply click on that. Well, first of all, you should select your operating system, but the operating system should be automatically selected for you. Okay, so click on the download and somehow about few seconds later the download should start and then finish. Cool, then you simply open it up. Okay, so then your computer should ask you whether you want to allow this program to make changes to your computer. You probably click on yes, and then in here this should pop up. So simply click on the continue, right? You can learn these things. I read it yesterday, so I'll click on the continue and it will download and install everything you need in order to use the Visual Studio, okay? Okay, once the download is ready, you should see this file where you can select what packages you want to use. So basically in here you select what programming languages you want the Visual Studio to support, okay? So make sure to select at least this one. I also recommend selecting this one if you want to work with C++. If you want to work with Python, you want to select this one. And if you want to work with Node.js, if you want to work with Unity, you may want to select this one. And with Linux, right? So there are a lot of tools. You may want to go through that and select all the things you need, but basically just make sure that you have this one at least selected. And once you're happy with your selection, click on this install. Okay guys, so eventually it should be installed on your computer and it should automatically launch. So you may need to actually log in with your account, and then you can maybe choose some settings like black layout or white layout, so that's up to you. And yeah, this is what you should see, and you should have in here something like VPF application. So make sure that when you click on file and then new project, you can actually select a C# as a language and then VPF application, right? So VPF application, right, this as a application, as a project, okay? So make sure that you have these two in here, okay? And if you do, everything's fine. What is program? Program is a set of instructions. So programming is basically telling computer what to do. But you can communicate only by instructions that computer can perform. It's same way as with human. You have instructions, so if someone tells you to shut up, you know what to do, right? Or if someone tells you raise your right hand, you can do that. But if someone tells you to drive a car to Mars, you cannot perform that instruction. Computer works the same way, only the instructions look like this. Store something in memory. Add 10 and 15. Is 15 bigger than 0? Paint the top left pixel to red. Now, you might think, okay, that's great, but how do we create a useful application with these limited instructions? Well, you break the application into set of instructions. Think of it this way: if you get lost and ask for a route, you will receive a set of instructions like go 1 mile, turn left, then take the second right, and you can't miss it. But if someone tells you, yeah, it's 2 miles that way, you will get lost. Same way with computer. You cannot tell computer, hey, do this app. No, you have to tell him, print this on screen, take that from user, multiply this and that, and print the result. So the important thing from this lecture is that you are telling computer what to do step by step. using instructions that computer can perform. So, what is a variable? Variable is basically a space in memory where you can store something and you can access it by name. And why is it called variable? Well, you can change its value how many times you want. The variable will still live somewhere in memory and you can still access it by its name. Only thing that changes is its value. Variables are in every program, in every application that you use, so it is important to know how to use them. So to sum things up, variables gives you the power to store data in computer memory and easily access or change the data by name. And you can choose the name. And another important thing is that variable have something called data type. This thing defines what values can be stored in this variable. For example, numbers or characters, and I will talk more about it in the following lecture. The type of variable is defined when you create a new variable. Mostly, you want some basic stuff like number or character or a string. So you tell the computer, hey, I want memory for some number and I want to access it by this name. It is actually much simpler than it sounds. But why do we have to define type of variable? To computer, everything is just 0 and 1, so he doesn't care whether he store number or a character. Yes, computer doesn't care. This feature is added for us, programmers, because if you write some complex application, you may need hundreds of variables, and if there was no type, after a while you will get lost and do something like multiply a string by number instead of multiplying two numbers, and your application would crash. So yes, we need data types, but not because of computer. In the beginning, the thing that variable can be set only to one data type is kind of pain in the ass, but as you get more advanced, you will appreciate this feature. The most used data types are integer. In code you write int, and it can contain numbers from -2 billion and something to 2 billion, but this number can't have decimal point. Similar data type is short, which can contain numbers without decimal point but smaller. It is from -30,000 to +30,000. But mostly you will use integer instead of short. I just want you to know that something like this exists. If you want to store really big numbers, you can use long data type. This allows you to store numbers that have 18 zeros, and that is a lot. If you need to store decimal number, you can use double data type. So here you can store numbers like 10.5 or -3. Another data type you will definitely use is character. In code we write char, and it can contain one character like a or dot or space. And another data type is string, and it contains, for example, hello world or James or any other string. Another data type is important mostly in conditions, and it is boolean. It can be set to true or false, and that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. Once again, I created a new project that I called variables tutorial, and all of these files were created for me. So right now I have the main function, and inside the main function I will write the code. So yeah, so what we want to do is let's just define a new variable. So let's say integer, so we will store a number, and let's call this one our number, like this, right? Semicolon at the end of the line. So this will tell the computer, hey, I want a space in memory for some number. Then let's assign a value to it. So our number will be equal to, let's say, 0, okay? and then let's print it out. So console dot write line like this, and inside it we will pass the R number. So R number. And what this will do? Well, it will print the value that is stored in this variable, this R number variable, and it will print it out on screen so that we can actually see it, okay? So then what we will do is let's change the value of our number to 10, okay, like this, and let's print it again. So console dot write line, and let's print it our number like this, and semicolon at the end of the line. Let's do another thing. So for example, we can set our number to the result of some operation, right? So for example, something like 2 plus 2, okay, and end the line where semicolon. So yeah, let's also print it out. So console dot write line our number. Cool. Another data type that we can use is the double data type, right? So let's define a double variable, and let's call this one decimal number, okay? Decimal number, like this, and end the line. So this will tell computer, hey, I want another variable in the memory, and this will be of data type double. And that doesn't mean that this one should kind of get lost. It will still be in the memory, right? This will be just somewhere next to it, okay? So yeah, let's assign a value. So decimal number like this equals to, let's say, 10.15, like this. So right now we assigned a value to it, and let's also print it out. So console dot write line, and in here should be the decimal number. Yeah, and another thing you may want to notice is that if I get rid of this, in here there's some green underlining. I'm not sure whether you can see it, but under this decimal number is a green underlining. And why is it there? Is that a mistake or something like that? No, it is not. It just means that we are not using this variable. So even though we assign to it, we don't use it anywhere later on. So that is just the way that Visual Studio tells us that this variable is redundant. It doesn't necessarily have to be in this code, but once I will use it to print it on screen, it is used, and this underlining disappears, okay? So cool. Let's do another thing. So let's also define a variable, but only on one line. So do the declaration and initialization on one line. So let's do it. Simply write integer for some number and equals to, let's say, 5. Okay, so this basically, this one line is equal to these two lines. Okay, so usually you want to write these two statements as this, right? So only on one line, but you can save some space, but it doesn't matter. Both of these versions works just fine. Okay, so let's also use other data types. So for example, char as a character, and let's call this one my character, and let's set it to C. Okay, so this will be a C. Let's also define a string. So string my name, for example, and this will be Luke, like this. So notice that the string is wrote inside these and the character is wrote inside these. Okay, so don't mess that up. That would make a mistake. So an error, your application would not be able to work. So yeah, another thing we want to do is maybe use the variables that we defined earlier. So for example, int new variable will be equal to our number. Okay, so this variable, our number, minus, let's say, the number. so another variable, this one. Okay, so what will happen? Well, inside this variable, we will store the value that is in this variable, this R number variable, minus the value that is stored in the number variable. Okay, you will see, I will print it out on the screen so that you can see it. So console dot write line, and let's print the new variable. Yeah, new variable, like this. Cool. And don't forget about the semicolon. This is a so common mistake, right? A lot of people from the beginning forget about the semicolon. So yeah, it happens. Don't worry about it if you forget. And yeah, so let's also define a boolean, right? So boolean, let's call this one I know, temp is a temporary. You sometimes want to use this name when you want to store something only temporarily for like a short period of time. Yeah, so let's set it to true, and let's also print it out. So console dot write line and the temp, and let's also actually print all of these. So let's also print the my character and my name. So in here my character, like this, and in here will be my name, like this, and I'll just put a space. Right, so let's actually run this application, and before you will see the results, before I will show you the results, I want you to write on paper what do you think will be printed. Okay, so basically, what do you think will be the result? So I suggest you pause the video because right now I'm about to show you what the results are. Okay, so as you can see, when we print the R number in here, so this line 15, it prints 0. Why? Well, we created our number and then we set it to 0. So the value that is currently in our number is 0. Okay, then we set the variable to 10. So this 0 gets lost, and currently we have 10 in there. So as you can see, the computer prints 10. Okay, then we set it to 2 plus 2. So the result of 2 plus 2 is 4, and then when we print it, it says 4, right? Then we created the new decimal number variable. We set it to 10.15, and when we print it on the screen, it says 10.15. What a surprise, right? But yeah, so then we created a new character, right? So my character, and it's just C. And when we printed it, it says C. Then we created a string, where is Luke, and when we printed it, it says Luke. So notice there are not, these characters get lost, right? They are not printed. This is just telling the way of telling computer that we want to print a string, a sequence of characters, okay? And then we created a new variable that is set to our number minus number. So in number we have 5, and in our number we have 4, right? Because this is the last time we set the our number variable. So in here we have 4 minus 5, so that means minus 1. So when we print it, it says minus 1 in here, okay? Then we wanted to print the boolean variable, so the temp variable, and as you can see, it says true, right? Because this is set to true. You probably know smaller than operator. If something is smaller than something else, it is true, otherwise false. These kind of operators are heavily used in every application. The expression could look something like this. Boolean variable is set to the result of 10 is smaller than 3. As you probably figure out, this variable will have value of false. Also, you can use the expression like if some variable is greater than 0. If the value stored in the variable is greater than 0, it is true, otherwise false. Other operators like this are the bigger than or equal to, and smaller than or equal to. Other useful operator is the is equal operator. Since we are using equal sign for assignment, if we want to check whether value is equal, we write two equal signs. So like this, 10, two equal signs, 12, and this will result into false. 10 equals 10 will result into true. Once again, you can use variables as an operand, so instead of 10, you can have some variable, and instead of 12, you can have other variable, and check whether they are containing the same value. Other heavily used operator is not equal operator, which is defined as exclamation mark and equal sign, like this. So 10 is not equal to 12 is true, because 10 is not equal to 12, and 10 is not equal to 10 is false, because they are equal. And once again, you can use variables instead of operands. I suggest you play with this a bit, and I will see you in the next video. Logical expression returns boolean value, so the result is either true or false. It takes some operands, and these operands have to be also boolean value, so true or false. First thing we can do is do negation, which is this exclamation mark, and what it does? Well, it flips the value, so negation of false is true and negation of true is false. I hope that makes sense. Other logical operation is and this operator returns true if both operands are true. Otherwise, it returns false. So, for example, bool result equals to true and false. We basically store false into the result variable, okay? Another useful logical operator is the OR operator. This operator returns false if both operands are false. Otherwise, it returns true. So, for example, true or false will result into true. These operators are extremely helpful in conditions. As you will see later on, you can combine these conditions into more complex expression, so like true or false and true. But I recommend doing this when you get more advanced. At the beginning, just create new boolean variable and set it to the result of false and true, and then do true or our variable. And that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. If condition is essential. Without it, we would not be able to decide and make smart application. So, it looks like this. We got the if keyword. Then we have parentheses, and inside them is condition. Behind the parentheses are braces, where are the instructions that we want to execute. And these instructions are executed only if the condition is true. If it is false, computer continues by instructions under the braces. As a condition, you can have some boolean value, like true or false, or boolean variable. But you can also have there some expression that results into boolean value. So for example, 10 is less than 20, or for example, 10 is less than 20 and 20 is bigger than 30. This condition would result into false, so the instructions in braces will not be executed. Also, you can use else if. It looks the same as regular if, only this time it has to be placed right under if or else if condition, and the code in braces is executed only when every condition above was not met. The last instruction is else. This instruction have no condition, it have only braces. It has to be placed under some if or else if condition, and it executes the code when all the if and else if conditions above were not met. I think you will understand it better on an example, so let me show you. Well, hello guys and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will talk about the if condition. So let's get into it. I created a new project and in here is the main function. So this is the function that will be executed. So in here, we want to define two variables, okay? And I will create a first and let's call this one bigger number. Okay, bigger number, and I will set it to 10. And then I will create a second variable and I will call this one smaller number. And I will set it to 1, okay? And we will use these two variables in a couple of conditions, okay? So let's do that. When we want to create a if condition, we can do it. So simply write if, then parentheses, inside it is the condition, then braces, and inside these braces are the instructions that we want to execute. So, for example, in here, we can write something like bigger number is not equal to smaller number. And then we can print it out. So in here, write console dot write line like this. And inside, let's print, for example, bigger number. And right now, I would like to print a string to it, okay? So there are a couple of ways I can do it, but I'd like to use the concatenation. So in here, I write plus sign, and then I write string. So the computer is smart enough to figure out that I'm not trying to add some string to a number because I cannot do that, right? It doesn't make sense to add, for example, I don't know, for example, is not to a 10, right? How would you add is not to a 10? That doesn't make sense. So what computer does is it says 10. It basically adds the value of this variable and puts it in front of this string. So it will result into this, okay? Because this is the value. So yeah, this is how you can, it's called string concatenation, okay? And what I want to write. Well, I'd like to write the bigger number is not equal to smaller number, okay? So is not equal to, and inside here, I can write the smaller number. So this will once again take the value that is stored in this variable, okay? Cool. And don't forget about the semicolon. So what this means? Well, if the bigger number is not equal to smaller number, this line will be executed and it will print 10 is not equal to 1, okay? So let's define another if condition. So for example, I'd like to write if, and let's also print before these conditions will take place. Let's print which condition is taking place, okay? So console write line, I will print out first condition, okay? Like this. So then let's define the second condition. So this is just for us to know which condition is being evaluated, okay? So let's inside here write something like if the bigger number is equal to smaller number, we would like to print, let's say, so console write line, and we would like to print that they are equal, right? So bigger number plus is equal, and once again plus a smaller number. So like this, and I'll just put a space inside here and that's it. So yeah, and let's also use another thing. So let's in here write the else branch. So once again, the else doesn't have any parentheses, any condition. It have only the braces and the instructions that will be executed if this is not met. So if this condition is not met. So in here, I will write just console.write line. And let's write in here something like else, right? That's all we need. So yeah, cool. right now let's do some other conditions. So console write line, and in here I'll write it's the third condition, right? So third condition, and let's do it. So in here let's write if, and let's write bigger number is greater than smaller number, right? The code that I'm writing right now doesn't make any sense. It's not supposed to be a usable application. It's just demonstration of the if statement, okay? So don't try to think about it too much. Why am I writing exactly this? It's just to demonstrate stuff, right? It shouldn't do anything smart, okay? So let's print inside here. So console write line, and in here what we want to do, well, bigger number is greater, right? So it's greater than the small number. Cool. And don't forget about the semicolon at the end of the line. And yeah, let's also use this time the else if branch. So else if, and let's write in here, for example, bigger number is not equal to smaller number. Okay. And in here let's write, well, basically the same thing that is in here. So I'll just copy paste it to save some time, right? So in here we'll print bigger number is not equal to smaller number. Cool. And let's also put in here the else branch, and when we get to else we will just print this else like this. Cool. So yeah, let's go ahead and create the fourth condition. So console dot write line, and in here we want to print fourth dot condition like this. And yeah, so what do I want to demonstrate in here? Well, the separation of these two. So for example, if bigger number is, well, basically this thing, so if I just copy and paste this to save some time. So if bigger number is greater than small number, I want to print this stuff, and then I would like to do if, and let's say the same thing as in here, so as in here, okay? So bigger number is not equal to smaller number. So while I'm writing these things, you may want to think about what will happen, what will be printed, okay? So that then when I evaluate this thing, maybe write it on paper if you don't remember everything. So write it on paper, and then when I run the application, you should check. And if you got everything correctly, then great. If you did not, then maybe watch the video again, okay? Cool. So in here, I just put the else branch in here, so that prints else. Cool. Let's get to the fifth condition. So console dot write line, and in here I will just write fifth condition like this. And this one will be a bit more complicated. So if bigger number is smaller than or equal to the smaller number, I want to console write line. I would like to print something, right? So what I want to print, a bigger number, bigger is smaller. So as I write this, you probably figure out that this will never be printed because it just doesn't make sense, right? Bigger is smaller, because that's exactly what this condition says, because the bigger number is smaller or equal to the smaller number. So, you know, it just doesn't make sense. But yeah, anyway, back to the point. So in here I will define a else if branch, so else if, and once again parentheses, and inside them let's say that the bigger number is equal to the smaller number. So make sure when you write the equal sign in your application, make sure that you don't forget to put the second equal sign in there. It's a, in the beginning, this is a quite often mistake, right? The Visual Studio will kind of tell you that by this red underlining, but still a lot of people do this mistake. So when you check for equality, you want to write two equal signs, okay? So in here, let's write console, right line, and let's just say they are equal. Okay. And yeah, let's end the line with semicolon. And let's define another else if. So else if, and so right in here I will demonstrate that you can put more else if branches under each other, right? So else if, and let's say bigger number is not equal to smaller number, and inside let's write console like this, right line, and let's write in here they are not equal, like this. Cool. And let's also put the last else if. So the else if condition doesn't necessarily, well, the if condition, the if statement doesn't necessarily have to end with else. It can end with else if, okay? So this else branch is optional, okay? So for example, let's say in here, bigger number is greater than the smaller number, and let's print it out. So console dot right line, and inside here we will write a bigger is greater. Okay, and put the semicolon at the end of the line. Cool. So right now this is the fifth condition, and let's also define the sixth condition. And in order to do that, I will just copy paste it to save some time. And in here, what I will change is, instead of this else if, I will put if at the end of each of them. Okay, and another thing, yeah. Well, no, I'll just do it like this. So if, okay? No else if. So you may want to think about what will be printed this time, right? These will not be the same, I can tell you that. So yeah, let's move on to a bit complicated conditions. So console, right line, and in here, let's write the seventh condition, right? I think, yeah. Seventh condition. And in here, we want to define the complicated. So if, and then let's use the and or. So for example, the bigger number is greater than smaller number. And so when we want to write and in the code, we use these two, okay? And let's say bigger number is smaller than smaller number. Cool. Right now you need to make sure to close the parentheses, right? And then put in there the braces. And in here, let's write just first, right? Just to save some time, let's write in here first. Okay. And in here, let's put another. So for example, else if, and I'll just copy paste this condition. And in here, I will put negation in front of this. Okay, so this is a even bit more complicated condition, right? So what does this say? Bigger number is greater than smaller number, and it is not true that the bigger number is smaller than the smaller number. So I will not be mad if you don't understand this, right? This is some not easy stuff if you are a beginner, so it's definitely fine if you like staring on the screen and don't get a thing. But eventually you should be able to understand it. So maybe watch the video again, maybe watch the previous lectures, and yeah, if you still don't get it, ask me a question. I will try to explain it in a different way, okay? So in here I will just print second, and let's also define the else branch. And in here, I will just print, so console right line, and I will print in here the else, like this. Cool. So yeah, I didn't use the or statement, so let's also define the last condition. I promise this is the last. And let's just copy paste it to save some time. So in here, this will be the 8th condition. And in here we will put or. So when you want to write or in your code, you write it like this, okay? So this is and, this is or. Cool. So right now, let's run the application. So Control and F5, and this will compile all the code and it will print out some stuff. So make sure to try this on paper, and if you still don't get it, everything, so please pause the video and try to do it on paper, because right now I'm about to show you the results. So let's do this. In here, as you can see, the first condition results into 10 is not equal to 1. So 10, that means this bigger number, is not equal to 1. So that is the smaller number, okay? Then the second condition results into else. So that means this condition was not met. And why is that? Well, 10 is not equal to 1, right? So this equal sign, this whole condition, will result into false. So that means this else branch will take place. Okay, so this will be printed and this will be skipped. Cool. The third condition says 10 is greater than 1. So why is that? Well, we go inside this if and check whether 10 is greater than 1. It is. So we print this thing out and then we break out of everything. So we skip this whole code and continue with this line. Okay, so when this is true, we print this. So we evaluate all the code that is inside these braces, and then we move. Sorry, I deleted it by a mistake, so I'll just do it like this. And then we move behind all of this code and continue with this line, okay? So then the fourth condition says 10 is greater than 1 and 10 is not equal to 1. So what's the difference in here? Well, in here you can see else if, and in here is only the if. So as you can see, in here it prints the same thing because this is still true, right? 10 is still bigger than 1. But 10 is also not equal to 1. And since this is a completely different condition, it will also be evaluated even though this was true, okay? So then this line is also printed and this is skipped, okay? So the else branch is skipped. Then we get to the fifth condition, and it says they are not equal. So why? Well, we go inside this and say 10 is smaller or equal to 1. Well, that is just not true. So we continue, we skip this line, and we continue with the else if. So 10 is equal to 1. That is also not true. So we skip this line and continue with this else if. 10 is not equal to 1. So yeah, that is true. And we print this line. Okay, so they are not equal. And then even though bigger number is greater than smaller number, this line will not be printed because this was true and this statement gets skipped. Okay, so let's continue with the sixth condition. As you can see, it prints they are not equal. Why? Well, it's just the only difference is with the else, right? There is no else inside here. So once again, this condition is false. This one is also false. This one is true. But since this is a completely different condition, we don't skip it, but we still evaluated it. So in here, it also says bigger is greater. So this line, okay? So this is also the code that we evaluated. Cool. Let's go to the seventh condition. So in here, it gets printed the second. And why is that? Well, bigger is greater than smaller is true, right? 10 is bigger than 1. But 10 is smaller than 1 is false because 10 is bigger. So true and false, this is the AND operator, will result into false, right? True and false is false. So this whole condition is false, right? So this line will not be executed. But then when we go inside here, it says bigger number is greater than smaller number, that is true. And then inside here it says 10 is smaller than 1, so that is false, right? But in here we have the negation. So we negate false, that will result into true. And then we have true and true. And this is, so this whole condition is true. And then we print this line, okay? I hope this makes sense. I'm not sure whether it does. So yeah, if it doesn't, don't worry about it, right? It's just okay. So this is a bit complicated stuff. And the 8th condition prints out first. And why is that? Well, inside here, we check whether bigger number is greater than small number. And it is, because 10 is greater than 1, right? And this OR, it doesn't even matter what this will result into. So even though 10 is smaller than 1 is false, so this is false, this is true, and there is OR, so that means this whole condition is true. So that means this line is printed and this whole code is being skipped. So yeah, I hope you understand most of it, right? You should be able to understand these simple conditions. And if you don't understand these last two, it's okay. Don't worry about it. And yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. Array is basically a collection of variables of the same data type in one. Let's say we want to store the first names of your friends. We could have, let's say, 10 variables of type string, and in each one of them have one name. But better way to store the names of our 10 friends is array. Array is declared like this. So we have type, but then there are squared brackets and then name. And if we want to initialize this collection with names, we write braces and separate the names with comma. Pretty good, right? But the best thing is we can get to each name by its index. But we start indexing from 0. So these are indexes of names. And when we want to access some name in array, we just write the name of our array, then squared brackets, and inside we write index of the name we want to access. And if we want to change the value at some index, we write once again name, squared brackets, and index equals to some new value. And it is same as with variable, right? Also, every array has something called length, and that is just number of elements in array. In our example, number of names, we can access this property by name dot length. And that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. Well, hello guys, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will talk about the arrays, so let's get into it. In here, I will define a new array, and this array will contain some numbers. So, for example, int, and then I write the squared brackets, and inside let's write ages. So this will be like some age of some persons, maybe, I don't know. And then let's also initialize this. So I will set it to curly braces, and inside here I will define a few elements. So for example 10, then I write comma to separate these 5, 12, let's say 20, and let's say 18, okay? So you can write whatever number you want, right? Obviously, this is just a demonstration, okay? So let's do something. Let's print the number that is on index 0. Okay, so console.writeLine like this, and in here we want to write, for example, number on index 0, and in here we want to print it. So as in previous lectures, when we want to concatenate a string and number, we use this plus operation, and inside here we can write the variables. So ages, then we want to refer to the element on index 0, which we can do like this. So squared brackets and inside it 0, so the index. Okay, so this will take us to this 10. Okay, and I end the line. So this should print number on index 0 is 10. Cool, let's just change some number, or let's do another thing. Let's define a new variable. It will be a integer, and let's call this one, I don't know, on index 2, and we will set it to the age on index 2, like this. So I will leave it up to you to figure out which number it should be, and I will also print it so that we can see it. So right line, and in here let's say age on index 2, right? And let's say it like this, and let's print the on index 2. Cool. So yeah, let's do another thing. Let's change the age on index 2. So ages on index 2 will be equal to, we can assign it to some number like this. We can assign it to some result of some operation like this. But we can also assign it to the result of some variable plus something maybe. So let's do it like this. So ages on index 2 plus 1. So I will once again leave it up to you what this will result into, whether it will be a error or something like that, or whether it will just work somehow. But yeah, I will leave it up to you, so you figure it out. And let's also print it out. So console write line, and let's say age on index 2 is the ages on index 2, like this, right? So then let's also figure out whether this variable is being changed, because in here we change the age on index 2, and in here we assign it, right? We set the value of this variable to the age on index 2, right? So will this variable change? I will leave it up to you to figure this out. I will not spoil anything for you, but yeah, so let's print it out. So let's say on index 2 will be equal to the on index 2 variable, right? So on index 2, cool, and end the line using semicolon. So yeah, cool. What we can do now is, for example, work with strings. So string, and it will be once again an array called names. And yeah, sorry, I forgot about the equal sign. And let's put there some names. So Adam, then I don't know, Ava, then for example Paul, and let's do another one, so Emily. Okay, so these will be our names, and we can do the same stuff as with the numbers, right? So we can set it to some variables. So string name will be equal to names on index I don't know 1, right? We can change the values. So for example, names on index 1 is equal to, I don't know, Peter. Okay, and let's also print these two out. So console dot write line, and let's print the name, and let's also print the names on index 1. So console dot write line, and in here let's write names on index 1, like this. So yeah, I will just run the application. You figure out what will be printed, okay? And pause the video because I'm about to show you. Cool. So as you can see, number on index 0 is 10. So ages on index 0 is 10, okay? Then we store the number on index 2, that means this 12, to on index 2 variable. And then we printed it, so it says 12. Cool, that's okay. Then this line may be a bit tricky for you, but how computer evaluates this thing is he takes a look at the argument first. Okay, so at the value, he first computes the value that he is assigning to the variable in here. Okay, so he takes a look at whatever is stored in here, that's 12. Then he do this plus 1, so that means this will be 13. And then he will set ages on index 2 to the 13. Okay, so then when we print it, it says 13 in here. Cool. And this variable was not affected. So why is that? Well, because when we created this variable, the computer creates a space in memory, right? So we have a completely different space in memory than the array is using. Okay, so we just set a value to a completely different space in memory. So it doesn't make sense when we want to change the memory in array. It does not have any effect on the different space in memory on this variable on index 2, right? So yeah, so if you thought this will be also 13, then you were wrong, okay? But that's okay, everybody makes mistakes. And yeah, let's also take a look at these strings. These will work exactly the same, okay? I just want to demonstrate that it pretty much doesn't matter about the data type. The array works the same for any data type, okay? So in here, I defined a new array and I stored the value on index 1, so that means Ava, and I change it to Peter. So then when I print the variable, it says Ava, and the name on index 1 is changed to Peter. Okay, so the Ava is not there anymore. And that is pretty much it for this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. As the name suggests, loop repeats the same set of instructions over and over until receiving the order to stop. And the order to stop is mostly defined by some condition. So we loop while this condition is true, and when it is false, we move on to instructions under the loop. Also, we can get out of loop by writing break statement inside the cycle. You'll see how that works in the next lecture. And do you remember arrays? Loops are often used if we want to go through some collection of data, like array. We got 3 types of cycles: for, while, and do while. The for loop is used when we know how many times we want to loop. So for example, if I know I have 10 names in array, I will use for cycle. While cycle loops while some condition is true. So while cycle is used when you are waiting for something and you don't know when it will happen. So for is used when you know how many times you want to loop, and while is used when you don't know how many times you want to loop. I will show you examples in next lecture. Last cycle is the do while. This one is pretty much the same as while, but this time instructions in loop are executed at least once. I know this might sound confusing, so let me show you some examples and hopefully that will clear things up. Well, hello guys and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture I will talk about the for loop, so let's get into it. First of all, let me just define a new variable and let's call this one temporary, so temp, and I will set it to 1. And I want to show you 2 new operations that we will use in the for cycle. So temp plus plus and also temp minus minus. So what these do? Well, the first one is called increment, and what it does? Well, it is the same as writing temp is equal to temp plus 1. So it basically adds 1 to the value that is stored in temp, and then it stores the result into temp. Okay, so these two lines are the same, and this minus minus means decrement, and that means basically this: subtract 1 from the temp variable. These two lines are once again same. So if I print it, console.writeLine on the screen, so in here I will write temp, and underneath I will write temp again. So if I run this, as you probably figured out, this one prints 2 and this one prints 1. Why is that? Well, it is equal to 1. In here we increment it, so we add 1 to it, that means 2, print it out. Then in here we decrement it, so subtract 1 from it, that means it will be 1, and we print it and it says 1. Cool. So we cleared that out, and let's define these cycles. So let's define the first cycle. So I will just once again print the number of cycles. So this will be the first cycle, or loop if you want. It pretty much doesn't matter what you want to use. Maybe loop is better, but yeah, whatever. So let's define the loop. In here we will define a variable that we will use in the for loop. So int I will be equal to 0. We usually use I, k, or j. Okay, so I, then j, and then k. It's just some convention. I'm not sure why, but pretty much every programmer uses this, so you should probably too. Then let's loop while this condition is met. So while I is smaller than 5, for example, and then in here is the final expression. What that means? Well, this expression will take place at the end of each iteration. So once we go through all of the instructions that are in here. So let's put some instructions inside here. Console.writeLine, and in here we want to print something like value of I is, and then we print the I, so plus I. So yeah, let me just go through it once again. We initialize I to 0, and then we can use this I variable inside this for loop. We will loop while I is smaller than 5, and then we will, at the end of each iteration, we will increment I. Okay, so if I run this, as you can see, it says first loop, and then value of I is equal to 0. Then it says value of I is 1. And why is that? Well, this final expression took place because computer evaluated this line and then gets to the end of this for loop, right? So that means this thing in here will be evaluated, and as I explained earlier, it adds 1 to this variable, so to I. So then we check for the condition, and I is still smaller than 5, so we once again go through the whole body. Okay, so we once again print value of I is 1. Then we get to end, increment I, check for this condition, it's still true, so we continue and print value of I is 2, do the same, once again loop through all of this, and then we get to the point where value of I is equal to 4, so we print it, we get to the end, right, to here, we increment I, so that means I is now 5, and when we check for this condition, 5 is not smaller than 5, right? So we break out of this for loop and continue in here. So let me also show you something, and that is that I will just close this thing, and that is that this loop is equivalent to this loop. Okay, so if I run this using Ctrl and F5, as you can see, it prints exactly the same. So that means this is the final expression that we have in here, and it's okay. It can be, it doesn't necessarily have to be in here. We can just put it inside here, but it's usual to write it inside here so you don't forget to increment it. It's a usual mistake for a programmer to do something like, well, not with the for loop, but if you don't use the final expression to increment the I variable, you may want to do a mistake like this one, where if I run this program, it will cycle forever. As you can see, it still prints value of I is equal to 0. And why is that? Well, we don't increment I, and this condition is true, but it's still true. So this will cycle and the computer will print this line forever. Okay, so I will just close this, and yeah, so make sure to increment the I like this. Another thing you may want to do is say I is equal to 5, and we will cycle while I is greater than 0, and we will decrement I. So you may want to pause the video and try to figure out what will be printed, and you may want to pause now because I am about to show you the result. And as you can see, it says 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why is that? Well, we decrement in here and we start at 5, so it prints value of I is 5. Cool. Then we decrement, and then we check for a condition. Okay, so this is basically the for loop. Let's do another thing. So let's do a second loop like this, and let's do something with array. So let's define a string array. You can use it like this, and let's call this one names, and it will be once again the array of names. I don't know, Ava, Adam, I think we used in the previous examples, then Luke, that's me, hey, and then for example Peter. Cool, and let's close this thing up. So right now I would like to cycle or loop through this array. So that means I would like to go from index 0 to the end of the array. So let's do that using for cycle. For right now I would like to define the new variable. Once again, I will call it I and set it to 0 because we want to start at index 0, right? Then I write semicolon. In here I write the condition, the ending condition. So in other words, in here I define how long do I want to loop. So I want to loop while I is smaller than the length of names, so then the number of names that we have in here. So names dot length. Then another semicolon, and I would like to increment I each iteration. So why I would like to increment I? Well, to get to the next name, right? Because the index starts at 0, 1, 2, and 3, okay? And when we increment, it's just moving in the array basically. So right now, what I can do is console.writeLine, and inside here, I will print the something like value on index. Then I would like to print the I, and I will set it like is equal to, and then I would like to print the actual name. So names on index I. Cool. So right now, if I run this program, it should print all the names. So as you can see, it does. Why is that? Well, we started at 0, okay? We go inside this loop. Well, first of all, we check the condition, and I is smaller than names length. This is true because there are 4 names, right? So names.length is 4. So 0 is smaller than 4. So we go inside here and print out value on index 0 is equal to Ava, okay? Because Ava is on index 0. Cool. Once we print this, we increment I because this is the final expression that takes place at the end of the cycle, okay? So we increment I is now 1, and we once again check the condition. So 1 is smaller than 4. That's true. So we once again print the name, that this time it's Adam, and once again we increment I is now 2, and we check whether it is smaller than 4. It is. So we bring in value on index 2 is Luke. Once again increment I, so I is now 3. 3 is smaller than 4, so we print value on index 3 is equal to Peter, okay? Then we increment I, so I is now 4, and 4 is not smaller than 4, right? They are equal. And that means we can break out of this cycle. So computer breaks out of this cycle and ends up somewhere in here. But yeah, there are no other lines of code to execute, so the program just ends. Okay? Cool. Let's do another one. So, for example, right now I would like to, another thing I want to mention, I forgot to mention it, is that there is no problem with this int I being initialized twice, right? Usually, if I would like initialize the temp variable again, declare the temp variable again, I would get an error because this variable is already somewhere in memory, right? I already have a space in memory that is referred by the temp name, right? So I cannot have two spaces in memory that have the same name, right? It doesn't make sense. So why is it possible to have the I declared twice, right? In here I write integer I, and in here I write integer I. Well, that is because this I is basically lives only inside this for cycle. So once we get behind this for cycle, we cannot refer to this I. So if I, for example, try to print the I in here, console.writeLine I will get an error. So if I run this, in here you should see some error. Yeah, it says there were build errors. Would you like to continue? No, I would not. And in here it says the name I does not exist in the current content because the I exists only inside this for loop. Okay, cool. So another thing I can do is I can define the I in here like this. Okay, so this will also work. And I need to put semicolon inside here. And if I run this program right now, it says an error. Yeah, and that is because in here a local parameter of I is already declared. And that is because it is right here, okay? So even though it is under this for cycle, I cannot declare it twice, right? So this is a bit weird, but that is just how things work. We got to, it's just how things work. So for example, if I would like to do it like this, so I declare a new variable called I and I set it to 0. Then inside this for cycle, I can use this variable because it is declared in front of this for cycle, so it lives also inside here. And I just set it to 5. So this will be executed only once, and then I will loop through it. So yeah, the same way as before. And then I can use the same variable inside here. Okay, so if I run this, as you can see, it works just fine, right? Everything is fine, and inside here, I can print the I. So as you can see, in here is 4. And why is that? Well, it makes sense because the last time we went into this for cycle, we printed value of on index I is 3 and it is equal to Peter, so the last name. Then we incremented I, so we set it to 4, and we checked whether it is smaller than the length of our names, right? And it was not, so we break out, and the value of I is still 4, right? It doesn't change anywhere in here, and we can refer to the I because it lives in the global scope, right? In the global content, if you want. So yeah, this is a maybe a bit complicated stuff, right? You have a local variable kinda, so if you define it in here, it lives only in the for cycle. If you define it globally, it lives anywhere. Cool? I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll see you next time. Well, hello guys and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will talk about the while loop. So let's get into it. I will just define a new variable called temp, and it will be a integer. So int temp, and I'll set it to 0. And right now let's define the while cycle. The while cycle is a bit simpler than the for cycle, since we simply write while, then parentheses in which will be the condition and only the condition, and then the body of the while cycle. So in here we have the instructions that will be executed, and in here we will have the ending condition. So for example, let's say while temp is smaller than 5, we want to increment temp, so temp plus plus, and yeah, that's it. After this cycle we will print it. So console dot write line like this, and in here I will write just temp. Okay, I could write something like temp variable is equal to, and then the temp, but it's just demonstration purposes, right? So yeah, you should try to figure out what will be in the temp variable. The while loop, basically what it does is it loops through the body in here while this condition is true, right? It's maybe a bit less complicated than the for loop, where we kind of initialize the variable, then there is the final expression, and it's kind of more stuff in the for loop. The while loop is just simpler, right? It's just while this is true, do this, right? It's just simple. So maybe for the beginner, the while loop is better, but I will leave that up to you. What kind of cycle do you like? Cool. So let's define the second one. So in here I will define a array, and I will show you that we can loop through array even using the while cycle. Okay, so let's call this one just ARR, and in here I will put some numbers, so 10, 20, 30, 40, just to make things simple. And in here I will once again define the while loop, and yeah, I would also like to define the I variable, right? So the same I variable that we have in the for loop lecture. So I will be equal to 0 because we want to start at 0, at index 0. I is a index. And we want to loop while I is smaller than the length of our array. So then the numbers, then the number of elements in our array, in this case 4. Cool. Then curly braces, and inside here we want to, for example, print the number. So console dot write line, and inside here we want to write the r, so element on index I from the RARR array. And yeah, we also want to increment I, so basically move on in the array, right? So increment the index, then we once again increment the index, and throughout this whole iteration. So that means we will go through every element, and once we get to the end, this I will be equal to the length, and we will break out. Okay, so if I run this, maybe you can print maybe you can write on paper, not print, but write on paper what do you think will be printed, and yeah, and pause the video because I'm about to show you the result. And as you can see, it says 5. Why is that? Well, the temp variable is equal to 0. But while temp is smaller than 5, we increment temp. So that means temp will be 1. Then we once again check. 1 is still smaller than 5. We once again increment, so it will be 2. 2 is smaller than 5. It will be 3. 3 is smaller than 5. It will be 4. 4 is smaller than 5. It will be 5. And then finally 5 is not smaller than 5. So we will break out of this while cycle and print it. So as you can see in here, it is 5. And then, as you can see in here, we loop like we loop throughout this whole array, right? So for each element, we printed it. And why is that? Well, this thing is basically the for loop. It's just the same. Only the declaration part is in front of the loop. The ending condition is inside here. And the final expression is at the end, okay? But it works just the same as the for loop. So yeah, another thing I want to mention is that you can do stuff like break out of the cycle. So why? And yeah, well, not necessarily why, this is just a like demonstration, but for the demonstration purposes I will just say, while if temp is greater than 3, I want to break out. So in here I just write break and then semicolon, okay? And I don't know why, so this is just a demonstration that this actually works, that this break will actually break out of this while cycle, even though this condition is still true. So if I once again run this application, as you can see it says 4 in here. And why is that? Well, we go and increment temp, and when temp is 4, this condition is still true because 4 is smaller than 5, but this condition is also true, right? Temp is greater than 3, right? 4 is greater than 3. So we'll break out of this cycle. We will not increment temp, so temp is still 4, and then when we print it, it says 4, right? So as you can see in here, this thing doesn't change because we didn't change any code. But yeah, so this is how you can use the break in your code, and this is pretty much the while cycle. So you may want to use the while cycle instead of the for. It's up to you, which one do you prefer. I think the while cycle is better for the beginner, but eventually you should be able to use all of these cycles. So yeah, that is pretty much it for this lecture. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. Well, hello guys, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we will talk about the do while cycle, so let's get into it. In here I will once again define a new variable. It will be just a number, and I'll set it to, let's say, 10. And in here I will write the do while cycle. So I want to do something that is in the body, right, inside these two parentheses, and I want to do this while this condition is met, okay? And I must put a semicolon at the end of this line. So inside the body I can have like several instructions, how many I want. So for example, I will increment I, it doesn't matter what I put in here, and then in here I will say while I is smaller than 0. So right now I will just print it out. So system, oh sorry, the console dot write line, and in here I will print the I. So what do you think will be printed? Well, the 11 will be printed. And why is that? Well, the way the do while cycle works is that even though this condition is false, right, I is 10 and 10 is not smaller than 0, it doesn't know that, computer doesn't know that when he evaluates the body. So the computer first do the body, okay, so he increments I, so he set it to 11, and then he gets to while and set this condition, right, and check this condition, check this condition, and 11 is not smaller than 0, so it will break out of this cycle and continue with this line, so it will print 11, right? So this is basically the only difference that is between the while and do while cycle. I will just for demonstration purposes put a basically the same while cycle in here. So while I is smaller than 0, I would like to increment I, and then I would like to print it. And as you will see, it will still be 11. So if I run this thing and show you, it is still 11. Why is that? Well, it starts at S10, okay? Then it do this do while and increments I and goes to this condition. Since 11 is not smaller than 0, it will break out of this do while cycle, so it won't go up again, but it will continue with the next line. So that means this first print, it will print 11, and then it will reach this while cycle, right? And while 11 is smaller than 0, we know that 11 is not smaller than 0, right? It is false, so this body will not be executed, right? So this whole block will be skipped and it will be print again. So it will once again print 11. So that is the only difference between while and do while, right? And the only difference is the time when we check the condition. In the do while, we check it at the end. In the while, we check it at the beginning, okay? And that's the only difference. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time. So what is a function? Function is a group of instructions that takes some input and returns output. Yeah, you probably look something like this. If I take the example from real world, imagine that you want a coffee from Automat. So you take money, pass it to Automat, and it will give you coffee or something similar to coffee. In this example, your money is the input. The operations that Automat does are instructions in function, and the coffee is the output. Similarly with computer. If you have function that accepts as a input some integer, and the passed value is set as value to, let's say, variable x, in the body we do some operations, let's say x times x, and we return this as a result or as an output if you want. I will explain more how this works in the next lectures. You may notice that this function returns x squared. And you can find similarity with mathematical function. If you have mathematic function, let's say f of x, where I is equal to x squared, y will be exactly what our computer function returns, and x is exactly what our computer function takes. If you have questions, just ask them, and I will see you next time. Well, hello guys, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, I would like to talk about the functions. So let's get started. I created a new project, and in here we will define our first function. So let's do it. Simply inside here, we write, first of all, we write public and then static. And why is that? Well, that's something that has to do with a object-oriented programming. I will not get into that right now. It's a topic for another course, right? But yeah, just when you write a function in C#, simply write public static in front of it and everything should work just fine, okay? Then we write the data type of the returned value, so of the output, okay? So it will be a integer, and then we want to write the name of function, so for example squared, and then parentheses, and inside the parentheses we write the arguments, so the list of arguments the function take. There can be multiple arguments, but let's for now say like this. So it will accept one argument called x, and then there is a body. Right now it is underlined, it have red underlining. Why is that? Well, that's just the Visual Studio telling us that this function is not returning any value, right? So it means it thinks that we are done writing this function, and it doesn't return anything, so he thinks it's a error, right? But we will write a code in here. So inside of here we will, let's just define new variable called I and set it to x times x, and we can also return it as a output, so return y, like this. So this line basically grabs whatever is stored in this y variable and returns it as a result. So what we can do now in the main function is define a new variable called temp, set it to 5, and we can, for example, print the result of the squared call. So console.writeLine, and inside here we can put the squared that will be called with, for example, 5 for simplicity, and yeah, and we'll print it out. So let's see how that works. If I run this application, it says 25. Why is that? Well, when I put this thing inside the console write line, it says squared 5. So this function gets called, and this x is equal to 5. Okay, so this 5 will be set as a value to this x. Okay, then we get to this body and set I to 5 times 5, which is 25, and then we return the I as a result. Okay, so 25 will be returned from this function. So then this console write line takes the value and prints it out on screen. So that means that's why this is 25. I hope that makes sense. So maybe for simplicity, I can do something like result and set it to this. Okay, so set it to this, and then I will print the result variable. So as you may figure out, it will be still 25, because right now it still returns 25. This function call is still returning 25, and right now we are printing only a variable. Okay, cool. So another thing we can do is, instead of this 5, we can use a variable. So we can write in here the temp variable that we defined earlier, and to change things up, I will set it to 10. Okay, so if I run this thing, as you probably figure out, it will be 100. Okay, so why is that? Well, the computer takes a look at what is stored in this temp variable. It is 10, so he passed 10 into this function, so x will be equal to 10. Then inside here it says I will be equal to 10 times 10, which is 100, and it will return 100 as a result. So then this result variable is equal to 100, and it will be printed. Okay, so that's why in here is 100. Cool. So let's do another thing. So function doesn't necessarily have to return a value. So it can be something like public static. So these are the two words that we write in front of all functions, and right now we want to write a function that is not returning us anything. It will, for example, just print a number. Okay, so it will just print a number on screen. So right now, if I want to do that, I will write void. That means this function is not returning any value, so that means the output of this function is nothing. And let's call this one print number, and I will pass a number to this function, so I can call it however I want. So for example, number, it doesn't necessarily have to be x. Okay, and since this is void, there is no red underlining because we don't have to return any value. And let's print it out. So console.writeLine, and in here let's print the number. And let's also say something like number and is number. Okay, and don't forget about the semicolon. So right now I can call this function. So I can, instead of this console write line, I can use the function that I defined, and in here write print number, and I will print the temp, and then I will print another number, and that will be the result. So in here I want to demonstrate that I can use the function multiple times, okay? So in here I use the same code multiple times, okay? And then when I want to change something in here, I can do it only once. So if I, for example, want to get rid of this number, I can do it only once. But if I had this console write line, copy and paste it in here, right, 2 times, I would have to change it 2 times, okay? So that is one of the reasons why we want to use functions. So if I run this, it should say like number 10 and number 100, right? Yeah, number 10 and number 100. So that is why we use functions, right? We don't want repeating code. We want the code that repeats somewhere. We want to write it inside some function. Cool. Let's do another one. So for example, public static, and this time we will return a boolean value. So boolean, like this. And let's call this one is bigger. So this one will accept 2 parameters. So there will be first number, and then there will be second number. Okay? And this function will return true if the first number is greater than the second number. Okay, so in here I'll just create a new variable called temp, and I will set it to first is greater than the second, right? And if the first is greater than the second, we return true, and otherwise we return false. So basically we are returning whatever is stored in this temp variable. So like this. But how do we decide which argument will be which, right? So far we have only one argument in each function. So how can we decide? So first of all, I will just write line. And inside here, I will print the results. So let's say is bigger, and as you can see in here, it says int first and then int second. I'm not sure whether you can see it, it's pretty small, but the first number that we write will be set to the first, and the second will be the second. So right now we are checking whether 10 is greater than 20, and 10 is not greater than 20, so the temp will be false, and we will also return the false. So if I run this thing using Ctrl and F5, as you can see, it prints false. So yeah, this is how you can use functions. And another thing I want to mention is that you can use this in a if statement, for example. So like this. So if, let's say, 20 is bigger than 10, I want to print the result variable again. Okay, so print number and then result. So for some reason, it's just, don't try to find any sense behind all of this code. It just doesn't make sense because it should not make any smart application. It's just for demonstration purposes. Okay, so in here it says number is 100. Again, why is that? Well, in this function call, 20 is first and 10 is second, okay? And 20 is greater than 10, so this is true, right? And if it returns true, this if condition is true, is met, and this code inside this body is evaluated, and that means it will print number is 100. So yeah, this is pretty much it. This is how the function works, and I know these functions are a bit complicated topic and this thing doesn't make any sense to you, so just don't worry about it. But yeah, so that's all it is. It's not so complicated if you really think about it, and if you give it like maybe a few hours. So It's just you just defining something that you can call over and over again, for example in here, okay? So yeah, that is pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'll see you next time. Why should you use function? The first reason is reusability. Once a function is defined, it can be used over and over and over again. You can invoke the same function many times in your program, which saves you work. Also, let's say that you have repeating code and you need to change something. If you are using functions, you change it only once inside the function, right? But if you are not, you have to change it multiple times. So each time you are writing code that you already wrote somewhere else, you should use function and just call the function whenever you need instead of copy paste the same code over and over again. The second reason is abstraction. In order to use a particular function, you need to know the following things: the name of the function, what the function does, what arguments you must give to the function, and what kind of result the function returns. But notice, if you just want to use the function in your program, you don't have to know how it works inside. It's sort of like driving a car. You don't need to understand every detail about the engine and wheels and stuff if all you want to do is drive the car, right? So I hope you understand. Functions are great. I recommend using them a lot, and I will see you next time. Well, hello guys and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we will create our first application. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to show you how you can take input from user. So basically remember that we have a console application and the user can write something in there. So for example, a number. And you want to be able to get the number, right? And store it somewhere in memory, so somewhere in variable. So in order to do that, you can use something like integer, then the name of the variable, and it will be equal to console dot read line. So we are not writing, we are reading the line that user wrote. And since this line is string and it cannot be set to integer, we also need to change the data type, okay? So there is a function that is used to do that. So this is why I talked about the abstraction in function, right? I don't necessarily have to know how the function that takes string and changes to integer is implemented inside. All I need to know is that it takes string and returns integer, okay? So it is a function called parse, and yeah, it takes the string, so that means this thing, this is a string, and it will return integer. Cool. So right now I can print it out. So console.writeLine, and in here I will write the temp. So if I run this thing, it will, first of all, it shows nothing, right? But there's a cursor. So if I, for example, write 100 in here and hit enter, this line will take the 100, this thing will change it to integer, and it will store it as a value to this variable. And then this line will print it. So cool. Right now, what we can do is define a calculator. So create a calculator. So I will change this to first. The idea is that it takes one number, then it takes second number, and it will print out all the possible mathematical operations, okay? So let's do it. I will take the first number, then I will take the second number, like this, and I will print out all the operations. So plus, minus, divide, and times, okay? Yeah, so let's do that. Right now, what we can do is define the results. So for example, int, and let's say this one result 1, maybe, it doesn't matter, and set it to first plus second. like this. Yeah, and it's good idea to write all of these in the same convention. So if you write the first variable with a lowercase, you don't want to write the second with uppercase, okay? So you want to keep the same conventions throughout your code. And then I would like to print it out. So for example, first, then I would like to print the plus sign like this. And then I would like to print the second. So the value that user wrote as a second. Then I would like to print the is equal. And then I would like to print the result. So like this. Cool. Right now what I can do is use these two lines and do all of the other operations. So minus. And let's also change this one and let's call this one just result, okay? And yeah, so in here we don't need the result variable anymore. We don't need the value that is stored in there. So we can just override it by the new result, right? So in here I will change this to minus. So first minus second will be equal to first minus second, right? That is stored in the result. Then we do I'll just copy paste it and do the divide and times. So divide and same thing in here. Yeah, I'm pressing the insert button and yeah, it's in here. So divide, and in here will be times and times. So yes, this is pretty much it. So if I run this application, it should, first of all, it starts and then it asks me for a number. So I will say, let's say 10. The second number will be 5. And it prints out all the operations. So 10 plus 5 is 15. 10 minus 5 is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 10 times 5 is 50. So that is cool. That is so cool, right? And another thing we can do is print, before we accept the number, print something on screen so the user know what he is kind of giving us, right? So let's do that. Simply write console and in here write. So we don't want to end the line after we print out the argument. We simply want to print it out and then stay on the same line, okay? So in here I will write first number like this, and then I will print second number in here. And once again, I don't want to end the line. I just want to let the user know that he is inserting the first number and then the second. So if I run this, as you can see, it asks first number. Let's change things up and say 50, and the second number will be 10. And as you can see, the result of all of these, and yeah, so it works. So this is the first application that you created, and yeah, you have a working calculator, so you can use it whenever you want. You can send it to your friends and do whatever you want. So if you have any questions, if something isn't working, feel free to ask, and I will see you next time.